Well, this week we will hear a rather challenging text in the Gospel of Luke, the one where Jesus states he doesn't come to bring peace, but rather division. And at first reading, it kind of can rub up against our ideas of who Jesus is. Jesus is the one who, in his many actions, has brought peace and love and has brought good things to his ministry. But with these words, they can be kind of stinging. And for a few weeks, we've kind of talked about those times where we've heard those hard sayings of Jesus in our Sunday forum, where we've kind of dived in. And this week, we get to hear one of those as well. I think to understand kind of the landscape of this text, it's good for us to look back a little bit at what we've been talking about the past few Sundays to kind of set the scene for the reading for this Sunday. The past few weeks, we've been talking a lot about our own shaping of discipleship and the idea of what God's kingdom is. We think about it as we pray, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, something that we pray here every Sunday in the Lord's Prayer. And when we pray that prayer, we're asking for God's kingdom to come. We are actively participating in that kingdom, recognizing that we too want to be part of the vision and mission God has for the world in a way that loves God and neighbor, in ways that honor each other, bring justice and peace to the world. We want God's vision for the world among us. And also, we've heard text about generosity and how when we have things, it's not all about keeping it to ourselves. It's not about building our own little kingdoms, but that Jesus encourages us to live a life that is generous, that if we have abundance, that we are to share that with others. In Jesus's teachings, a lot of times in his ministry, throughout his whole ministry, kind of also rubbed up against the scribes and the Pharisees, ways in which Jesus crossed barriers and lines, ways in which Jesus turned against the popular opinion. Even at the beginning of Luke 12, in this chapter we're going to read, Jesus warns his disciples to beware the yeast of the Pharisees, because the Pharisees had so much influence on the cultural landscape, the religious landscape. And many of Jesus's words were like a sword that cut through and spoke the truth, confronting even the scribes and Pharisees with how they were not honoring the law, ways in which they were turning away from the ways of God. And even in the reading we have from Hebrews, Hebrews also talks about the many people that God has raised up to speak truth into the world, who have been part of God's kingdom in the landscape of speaking truth and in the actions that they have done. And a lot of them, including especially the prophets, have been ones of unpopular, who are unpopular among them, that their words were not always taken as wise. They weren't always listened to. But sometimes that is what happens in our discipleship walk. Sometimes we hear things that kind of confront us and put some truth in front of us or things to discern and pray about and have us ask questions like, where is God calling me at this moment? How am I called to love? How am I maybe not honoring God and neighbor in the way that I live and the actions and the things I say? And so this text can be challenging for us, but I think it's important. And I saw in one commentator's notes, it's kind of like a doctor who gives kind of a diagnosis or kind of a hard pill to swallow. This is a text that it may be challenging for us to hear, but it's one in which the Spirit may be stirring us to examine our own lives and the ways that we live. Jesus also recognizes in this gospel text that he too is facing a very hard, distinctive line in which he will go to the cross. He will not just curry to the favor of people around him. He will stand his ground and go to the point of death because he knows that in the end, it is all worth it for the sake of the world. maybe to bringing to mind there are people in history who also have lived a life where they too have had to decide, do they stand on the side of the society or the system that they are a part of, or are they going to stand where God is? Martin Luther was one of those people who was told to recant many of his writings, and he, even though it was unpopular and even though there was the threat of his life, he knew he could not recant because to do that would be turning his back on God. Martin Luther King Jr. marched in the civil rights movement, spoke in ways that spoke truth, and sometimes his words were words that confronted, but they were words that people needed to hear when people who were in the Black communities were being harmed and that there was great division. This is not the vision that God has for the world. We even think of history that we've talked about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who stood against the Nazis, Desmond Tutu, and Nelson Mandela, who stood against apartheid. Been many times in history where people have had to make those distinctions in the sand to say they are going to stand with God and where God has called them to love and serve all of creation. And so this Sunday, we together will journey into this challenging text, and we will ask these same questions, how God is calling us. And even though we may have this challenging text before us, we trust that the Spirit is moving among us. We trust that the Spirit is guiding us and stirring in us. And sometimes that stirring is a formation piece, maybe in the next part of our journey, or maybe it is even making our own decisions of where we stand. But I invite you to come this Sunday as we dive into this text together. Peace to you on this week. Take care.